My name is Kathleen Marchetti. I am a fifth-year PhD student in the Political Science and Women's Studies dual degree program. And I am currently teaching L.E.A.P 203, which is Introduction to American Government. I've had experience with both clicker systems that have been used at Penn State. So I TA'd the 300-person introductory course for political science. And in the fall, we were in the old system. It was very confusing. It crashed in the middle of the semester. It created a lot of problems. So I kind of decided, well, I'm never going to want to do that when I teach my own class. And I was very reluctant as a TA for the spring. When we were piloting the new iClicker system, I was just anticipating it being another nightmare. And I was completely wrong. The students really enjoyed them. They're so much easier to use. They're way easier for the instructor to use. And given that it was such a large class, we were able to see a really interesting distribution of results, but we couldn't talk about them as much. So the class that I'm teaching now is very small. And I thought it would be a really good idea to not only introduce these to incoming freshmen, which comprise my current class, but also to be able to talk through their answers, basically. So rather than just talking to a couple people and moving on, we can have a richer discussion over it. So I would say I decided to use them when I saw how successful they were in the bigger class. I have not had any technical issues as of late. I think the only thing that students in the larger classes were complaining about is that their batteries were dying without warning. Sometimes I think they would just throw them in their backpack and they'd be left on. But other than just a battery thing, that was the only thing I've encountered. I think the only tricky part I've encountered in this class is the moving back and forth between the graphs and your PowerPoint slides. Sometimes you have to hop up and click back on the PowerPoint to get it off of clicker mode. But that's, completely minimal. That's not a big deal. We had a very lengthy discussion. I had a lot of clicker questions incorporated into today's class. And at one point I said, are you guys sick of this? Are you kind of clickered out for the day? Should we just kind of go back to a lecture? And they all of them were like, no, I like it. I really like it. They were like, I love the clickers. It was much more positive than even I was expecting. So I think it's really fun for them to be able to put in their answers and kind of see it pop up on the screen right away. And I bring in some information about, what some poll data from the rest of the American population shows, and I can compare it to their graphs. So I think they really kind of like being able to make those connections and amongst each other, as well as kind of seeing a graphical depiction of the class population versus the population of the US in terms of preferences for politics. So they liked it. Definitely. I think what it does is it helps, and this was kind of my intention with using the system, it helps the students kind of feel affirmation that their response is legitimate. If they can see that the rest of the class or a portion of the class thinks the same or guessed the same answer or whatever, they are, I found, more likely to talk about it versus if you kind of just throw a question out there and wait for somebody to raise their hand, it can kind of lead to a lagging in terms of trying to drag discussion out of them. But it's a very nice kind of opener. Like, I'm going to ask you all anonymously, I'll bring it up so everyone can see, and then people might feel more comfortable saying, oh, okay, well, there are 10 other people that feel just like me on this issue, so I must not be the only one. So it's really helped them kind of open up a little. This is the first class that I have taught. So in terms of a change in my teaching style, since I'm just starting out with this, I wouldn't say that this is a change because it's just the beginning. I think what has changed is kind of my idea of what makes a good lecture. Prior to this, I probably never would have been using PowerPoint. I never would have been using something with technology to interact. That's just not what I experienced when I was in college, so I probably would have taught the way I was used to. But being exposed to different technologies and media here at Penn State has made me realize that it's not just a performance for students and they're not just sitting back and having information kind of given to them. It can be used in ways that are more interactive and more discussion based, which was what I was experiencing as an undergraduate. So I know that's not necessarily directly answering the question, but I think it absolutely has changed the way I think about what makes effective teaching. I'm surprised at the simplicity of the system, like pleasantly surprised. It is so easy for them to just, be able to register their answer quickly. The registration system, the online registration system is very, very simple. They've all been able to do it on their own. There's not a whole big learning curve. So I'm not an incredibly tech-savvy person, and I feel like it's accessible to me. So if it's accessible to me, it should be accessible to most instructors.